candidate whatsoever that is up here tonight. We are doing this for the benefit of the town members and the county members here. As you already know, questions have been written on the index cards. They will be chosen at random. If we don't have enough time, we cannot guarantee that we will get to every single question, but we're going to do our best to do so. Each candidate will have 1 minute, as Phil already said too. They will have 1 minute in order to answer. We will be in the back with a timer, just so that you know. I've already explained this to the candidates. When they're getting to 10 seconds, we will be holding up this card so that they know that they need to wind down their questions, or their answers, I should say. And then when we get to a minute, please stop. Okay. So just so that you know. Let me see what else here. So there is no debating. The candidates will answer the questions. There is no debating between the audience and the candidates, and there's no debating between the candidates either. And if anybody has any issues during this event and you don't like it and we ask you to leave and you don't leave because you are being inappropriate, we have nice Deputy John Shaw back there who'd be more than happy to have you out the door. Okay? So, with that, please enjoy the evening, find it informational. I will also just very quickly tell you too that we do have tickets tonight on sale for Tim Sample, who's coming on Sunday as well at 2 o'clock. I hope you'll join us for that. We also have some silent auction items that we're going to be silent auctioning off on Sunday, but we put them back there tonight in case anybody's interested in a preview of that. And enjoy the show tonight. Thank you.
Deputy Shaw's services tonight. Another thing I might ask, if you have cell phones, please turn them down or turn them on vibrate, if you would please. Okay? I remember to do that tonight. All right. Shall we start?
Wait, 1 second.
Yep.
Sorry, just and let me just get my timer.
Oh, which is timer, yep. I just hope I don't play 52 pickup here. Okay. All right. Yes. We're going to do your introductions right now.
All right.
Yeah. And since you have the letter of the alphabet, Scott,
There you
go
go.
first.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for agreeing to moderate this show. I'd like to thank the WInterport Meeting House Meeting House Board for putting this on tonight. I'd like to thank you guys all for coming out. My name is Scott Cuddy. I was born and raised here in WInterport. A couple of years ago, my wife Kate and I were lucky enough to be able to buy the house that I grew up in for my mom Judy. And my 2 boys right now are sleeping in the room that I grew up in. And that's a wonderful feeling, and if you have kids, you know that you have expectations and hopes for your kids. And I know that we need 2 things for that. We need a good education, and we need to have good jobs for those kids when they grow up. Right now, the state is not funding education appropriately, and I think that's one of the reasons I'm running. And we have fewer jobs right now in this state than we had in 2007. These are not the right direction for us to be moving in, and I absolutely want to be part of changing that and improving things. So once again, thank you all for coming out. I appreciate the time.
Hi there, my name is Jonathan Fulford, and also I want to thank everybody for coming out. I live over in Monroe. I did run 2 years ago, probably most of you know, and it was close, but there's no second place really in politics, but I figured it's close enough I'm going to give it another shot. I want to also thank the opportunity to speak. You know, I know that some of the business community helped organize this, and as a small business owner for the last 30 years, that's a part of the community that's really important to me. And I see small business as the foundation of the Maine economy and Waldo County's economy, particularly with the loss of the big manufacturing jobs, which because of free trade, I don't think we're seeing them coming back anytime in a big way. So I think that support for small business is very important in my mind. And again, I really appreciate having a chance to speak with all of you.
I'm James Gillway. I am your representative for District 98, which includes WInterport, Frankfort, Swanville, and Searsport, where I live and I work. My roots run really deep into Winterport. My grandmother was a lock. My grandfather met her, fell in love, moved up here, and my father was born on Route 1A, just north of the village. But there were no jobs when he graduated from high school in Winterport. So he went away and he got a job in the Merchant Marine. You're going to hear about the Merchant Marine again, because that's another thing that I've been working very hard to do in Augusta. This past session, we passed a law to create a magnet school to develop our Merchant Marine and send our kids back to the seafaring life. And it's very important to me, and I'd like to be back out there to fight the fight and get that through till its completion. And I'd like to move back to Winterport. I was your constable, chief constable 30 years ago. So I love the town, and
Nice, and thank you. I appreciate everybody coming out tonight and caring enough about the state of Maine to make an informed decision about your vote. That's incredibly important, because decisions do matter, and the people that you elect and serve at the State House do make important decisions that affect your life. That's why when I have served at the State House, that's why I think it's so very important that you work together to really find solutions for our state's enormous problems. Make no mistake, no one person has all the answers. And over the last 6 years, I've tried to work with both sides of the aisle, bring people together, find collaboration, find a way to make our state a better place to live. I think that's what every elected official in this state ought to do. I hope that I've developed a reputation for doing that, and I hope I've earned your support. Thank you.
Right now, I see several in here on one topic, and if we have time, I'll go through them as we get to them, but there seem to be one specific topic. The first question goes to, and what I'm going to do is I started with Scott, the next question will go to John, then we give a question, and then we'll keep rotating around. So you'll all be caught on the hot seat, okay? Jonathan, you're going to start on this one. What is your position on question 2? Stand up for students, state funding, education at 55%.
Well, I think that's question number 2 is a ballot question I strongly support. I think it's 3 reasons why I think it's a good ballot question. One is it lowers property taxes an average estimate of $3 million. I believe that lowering property tax is the most important tax to lower that we have in the state. I also like that it more evenly funds education across the state of Maine, so no matter how wealthy the community that your children are growing up in, the quality of education available to them will be more evenly funded, and I think that's very important, that the difference between, say, Camden and Mountview is pretty dramatic, and I don't think that's a fair thing to have. And I think that the funding mechanism for it also I actually am supportive of. I believe that it imposes an increase of income tax on money that you earn, it's taxable over $200,000. I think that's a group that actually can pay a little bit more and take the tax burden off of the rest of us. Thank you very much.
What is your position on question 2? State funding at 55%.
I completely support funding, as the referendum ordered us to do many years ago, education at 55%. One thing we all need to be aware of is when something is done in Augusta to change the rules and they move the bar, it's hard to attain it. Our school funding is so vitally important, it's a tax relief issue. But having said that, I'm not sure that question 2 is going to get us where we need to be. I've worked, I mentioned earlier, to create a magnet school for marine education. And it was a hard battle through the education committee. One thing I learned, the closer you get to the ocean or the closer you get to water, and you start smelling that salt, the less money you're going to get. The funding formula is broke. We need to fix the funding formula before we can actually look for additional funding to dump into it. Dumping good money into a bad system is not good.
Yeah, I saw that. So I'll give you the first example of working across the aisle in a bipartisan way, because I agree with former Governor John Baldacci. I think this is bad for Maine's economy. It's a way to really export jobs. Now, do we want to take and fund schools? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, the legislature made significant gains in restoring revenue sharing as well as school funding. I was proud to be part of that fight. But to increase the tax burden on Maine's small businesses is the exact wrong thing to do. These are job creators. These are the people that we're talking about that are going to employ 5, 10, 15, 20 people that are driving Maine's economy. And by increasing their tax burden, you're asking them to export their jobs. I think that's the wrong thing to do. You also want to remember that many of these people that you're talking about can choose to live any place in the world. It's easy for them to take their money and go elsewhere. So.
Thanks. I'm also in support of question 2. I'm currently on the school board here in RSU 22, and I've been able to see how the funding of the school system directly relates to what we can provide in terms of programs, and for what we have to look at cutting. And since 2004, when the referendum was passed, and the state was told, we want you to provide 55% of essential programs and services, we've never been closer than like 53.5%, 54%. And we are currently down in the high 40s. This is a basic issue. We absolutely need to fund schooling appropriately at the state level. Ideally, yeah, I would wish that the legislature had been able to work with the governor to get to the point where we don't have to do it by referendum. But we have 5 referendum questions on because there has not been enough action in Augusta to make things happen. These are big questions, and we need to solve them, and unfortunately, this is the only way we can get this one done, so I think we do have to push through with question number 2. Thank you.
We can hold off until like all 4 have answered and then applaud all at once. We might be able to get through a lot more. Because there are some good questions here from everybody. James, you're next. What would you do on local taxes?
Reduce them. Actually, what I said earlier, when Augusta makes a decision, oftentimes it's not a decision to help you with taxes, it's a tax shift. And one of the things that motivated me to get out to Augusta was the fact that we started rating revenue sharing under the Baldacci administration. So I got out there thinking, well, we have a new administration, it'll get better, and all we ended up seeing was more revenue sharing rates. In fact, a push to eliminate it. I worked very hard, and I know Mike has worked very hard to produce budgets that restore revenue sharing. A lot of it's been taken away. We're not going to be able to put it back into the budget like that all at once because it would bankrupt us. Slowly, we want to increment that money back in because that money is not money that the town can just go buy a fire truck with. The auditors get a hold of that and they put it in, and we don't have control over it. Some people in Augusta think we do. We need to get revenue sharing back to where it was, and it'll give us some tax relief.
Property tax. What would you do for local property tax?
So the reality is, I think property taxes are probably the harshest tax. Okay, they're not based upon an asset or a revenue stream. They're based upon an evaluation. That evaluation, you may or may not have equity in the home. Yet you're faced with the exact same property tax. That's really tough for people that, particularly, I like to use the example of the dairy farmers in Waldo County. You know, they're land rich, cash poor. That's why it was so important during the budget debate when we talked about reducing the income tax. That's why it was so important to me and many others that we not turn our back on our responsibility to our local communities. That's why revenue sharing and funding for our schools is important. And so I've worked very, very hard and tried to stay fully aware of the tremendous burden that property taxes add to people with very limited means.
Thanks. Yeah, so I touched on this briefly in the answer about question 2, but in terms of local property taxes, if we all look at our property tax bills, you see the section that goes to the school system. That's always the biggest chunk. No matter what town you're in, some goes to the town, some goes to the county, and then a huge chunk goes to the schools. If you are neglecting to fund schooling the way you're supposed to, that puts the heaviest burden on, not just on the property tax, but also what services can a town provide to the people? Are you able to take care of the roads system? Are you able to trim trees back so that people can see stop signs? Are you able to take care of the things that a town's supposed to be able to do? That is burdened at the same time the property tax is burdened. I mean, I think in Winterport, our town council has worked very hard to keep the tax rate as low as possible. But this is an ever-increasing burden on them when revenue sharing and when school funding are not being funded appropriately. And those are the two big things. So I see that she's about to hold up a stop sign, so I'm just going to stop.
Thank you.
She's heavy-handed.
She is.
Yeah, as I said earlier, property tax I think is the tax that we most need to lower, and that referendum question number 2 is a key component of that. The other one is fully restoring the revenue sharing that was taken away in 2011. There has been some progress on that, but it has not been enough and it's not been fast enough. This is, I think, critical for also stimulating the economy. If you want to have people, if you want the economy to grow, you put money back in the pockets of people who spend it, and that is actually the people who are middle class and working class. And this is one of the key components of doing that is basically addressing property taxes.
Thank you. What can be done to incentivize solar installation on private homes?
So the state already does that. We have programs that run through efficiency Maine that do exactly that. Provide significant incentives for people to put solar panels on their homes. That's been going on for some time now. Now, obviously, there was a huge debate about the solar industry in the legislature last session. The bill passed in the Senate unanimously. Some of you may or may not be aware of that because there's been mixed messages in the newspaper about that. But the reality is that bill passed unanimously in the Senate. It ended up dying in the House. I'm sure there will be a significantly more debate on that very issue in the upcoming legislature, and I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There was a bipartisan bill regarding solar installation in the state of Maine that went through the legislature last time around. It was vetoed. Veto was upheld. That bill needs to be passed, and we need to have majorities in the House and Senate that will pass a bill like that. Solar, I work as an electrician. That's my job. I know men and women who go to different states to work on solar farms because it's good work, it's clean work, and it is the kind of work that other states are doing at massive levels. And when I say other states, I don't mean Midwest and New York. I mean Connecticut, Vermont, New Hampshire not so much. Massachusetts is doing huge solar. And these guys are going and getting really good paying jobs with benefits that could be here right now today, but they are not. And this is solar installation on houses, but also some commercial solar as well. The bill was right. It was right before. It needs to be passed. And if I go to Augusta, I will absolutely be a vote in favor of improving solar installation on homes.
Woo-hoo!
So I am a strong proponent of solar. There is right now net metering is the only way in which is not actually a state support. It's actually a regulation on how solar is monetized, and that is under threat right now by the PUC. We have the slowest growth of solar in all of New England. It's good jobs. I actually worked on some of the language on the solar bill that did not pass. The minority port was also fortunately did not pass, but was voted on in the Senate, and that was a kill the bill amendment before it came back around. This is a really important one. This is exactly the example of the kind of jobs we need. We need good paying jobs, not just more jobs. We need good paying jobs in the state of Maine. This is a good paying job. This would have created a lot of good paying jobs in Waldo County, and it would have lowered electrical rates throughout the entire state. This needs support. I would be eager to go to Augusta and fight for this. Thank you.
We have Sundog Solar in Searsport. The owner's a good friend of mine. I voted for it. I told my caucus from the very beginning I was going to vote for it. And even though there was a lot of adversity and a lot of infighting within the caucus. I stayed my ground, I voted for it, and I'll vote for it again.
Scott, we'll start with you. Could you explain what you believe is the role of the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, in its relationship with the Maine legislature, including any personal tie you might have with that organization?
So, 1 minute, really.
Well, explain what the American Legislative.
All right, so ALEC is the American Legislative Exchange Council. Is a group that was started with this sort of really nice sounding idea that we're going to take what works well in different legislatures and we're going to write up this model legislation and just hand it out. And other legislatures can take these great programs and do these things and we'll improve everybody that way. Sounded really nice in the beginning. What ALEC became over time, though, as people watched it, was this huge corporate-funded attempt to strip certain rights away from people. ALEC has been a huge proponent of bills that are things like right to work, which is a very, in my view, a very anti-worker bill. They put forth model legislation that helps to take away people's right to vote when they are trying to pass voter ID laws that are just horrific laws. They're not a good way to do voter ID. So that's my perspective on ALEC and their stuff. So,
Yeah, that's a big question.
yeah.
The question was, do you have any ties? So,
Oh, I have, yes, that's a good point. I have no ties to ALEC.
Good catch.
Thank you.
I have no ties to ALEC or any other corporate funding or sponsorship in any way. And I will never take any corporate sponsorship or funding for anything I ever do at any point in my, this point short, but hopefully longer political career. And I think this also speaks to one of the things which I'm most concerned about, that when I didn't get elected, I spent the last 2 years making a nuisance of myself in Augusta, because I figured I was going to run again, so I better learn more about what I was doing, if I do get in. And I was most disturbed by the influence of lobbyists in actually subverting what I would consider our democracy by actually being able to provide funding to political campaigns and leadership PACs that seems to overcome the actual will of the people when political legislation is in front of them. This, I think, is a real serious problem which needs to be addressed. Eliminating leadership PACs would be a good start. We have, unfortunately, at the federal level, we'll have to challenge the
Supreme Court.
I'll start with the answer. I don't belong to ALEC. I've never belonged to ALEC. I see the literature, I read everything. I'm glad that these guys explained it because I've never been involved in it. I'm also not influenced by lobbyists. I listen to them just like I read the literature, but the two things that we need less of are lobbyists and special interest groups in Augusta. We need people who will represent you, not who represent the special interest.
And that question is for me,
Okay.
Because all you know, and Mike Thibodeau has been a member of ALEC. Now, the reality is, Carol Weston was the former state senator, said to me when I was a member of the House, Mike, you ought to join this organization, you'll get a lot out of it. Then I'm going to have to reset if I have to take and repeat myself, okay? So, Senator Weston asked me to join me, be a member. She says you'll get a lot out of this organization. I went to a couple meetings. You know something? There was no boogeyman there. They were trying to develop model legislation that's introduced in a lot of states. The reality is, I never introduced any of it. I didn't really think it was that great an organization. I didn't get that much out of it. And I haven't been a member for 5 or 6 years. So I'll assure you that, it doesn't have any influence on the decisions that I make at the State House. Thank you.
I'm glad you learned what it was. I didn't know what it was. Jonathan, we'll start with you. Do you buy into the science behind climate change?
yes. I think the evidence is abundant, and that science therefore compels us to take action. That we can do things now which will actually create good jobs and also reduce the impacts of climate change that are occurring now, and also we can do things to adapt our economy, adapt our businesses, adapt our agriculture and our fishing in order to accommodate the changes which are also going to become even greater. This is, I think, a key issue for all of us and for future generations. It's actually the one which motivated me to actually run initially, was being with my grandchildren and thinking about the impacts that that's going to have and the lack of action that is happening in the government around us other than a little bit of lip service, and that's not good enough. So, I'll stop there.
When was the last time it rained? Is there climate change? Obviously there is. Are we part of the problem? Obviously we are. But I don't buy into the premise that it's going to end the world, and I think we're on a cyclical cycle that we have bad weather, we have severe storms, and it gets better. But there is obviously, we're contributing to it. We drive big cars, we have diesels, we're contributing to some of it. So I guess the answer succinctly would be I buy in.
You know, if we want to talk about gross domestic product and the amount of CO2 that we're putting into the atmosphere,
Louder, please.
I'm trying my best, ma'am. Okay. Look, if we want to talk about our gross domestic product as a nation and the amount of CO2 that we're putting into the atmosphere, we as Americans have made great progress. You know, my sister just a month ago went to China. She was in Beijing, and she took some pictures from up on top of one of their very high skyscrapers, and their clouds were black. The absolute best thing that we can do as a state and a nation is to make sure that we make the things here, that we grow our economy, that we stop buying stuff from countries that don't have the same environmental priorities that we have.
So, yes, I do believe in climate change. I buy into the science, however you want to say it. If I have 9 mechanics tell me my brakes are going and 1 mechanic tells me my brakes are not going, I get my brakes fixed. And that's where we are right now. People who study climate change, who study the history of the climate on the planet, almost 95%, I think, of those folks all agree absolutely that it is not only happening and that we're causing it, but that it is absolutely an existential threat. And that if we do not do something about it, we are going to have an extraordinarily hard time for the people that we are leaving here. You know, my kids, I mentioned them in the beginning. I think not only about them, but my grandkids, as Jonathan mentioned his grandkids. What are we going to leave to them? And what are we going to think about ourselves when we see what we're leaving to them? Did I stand up and do something? And I hope I'll get the chance to stand up and do something.
You may see me looking through these cards and sorting them up here, because if I come across a series of questions that are all the same topic, I'll put those, if we have time at the end, I'll pick those up and go through them. But we pretty much hit the school funding. So, this one we'll start with you, James. How do you feel about ranked choice voting?
Well, I was one of the representatives who was approached by lobbyists in both directions. Do it, don't do it. We have a problem. We need to solve it. It's not constitutional. I went to Roger Katz, who I have great respect for. He's a senator out of Augusta. Very, very bright man. I was told by the lobbyist, he's on board. He thinks it's a good idea. It works both ways. This is a subject that's been a Republican issue and a Democrat issue. When your candidate's not sitting in the I give him a promotion, sorry. In the Blaine House, and the other it's your issue. When it's that person, it's our issue. I think we need to fix it. Roger Katz told me straight up, it's not constitutional. We have to fix the constitutionality of it before we can move forward with a referendum to make it the law. And I think that's one of the issues with referendums. They don't always fix the problems, and I wish Augusta would do more.
Get them more.
Yeah, I did. I tried.
Mike,
I'm actually
how do you feel about ranked choice voting?
perfect. And thank you. Look, the reality is when the bill came to the Senate, I asked the Attorney General of the state of Maine, Janet Mills, to weigh in on it. Tell us, Janet, is this constitutional? She sent back her legal opinion, and she said, no, it's not. This violates Maine's constitution because Maine, back in the 1800s, I'll give you the wrong year, but mid-1800s, changed its constitution. It went from saying that the House and Senate would be elected by a majority, which was the words that it used, to a plurality. Them two words mean something very, very different. A majority means 50 plus 1. Plurality means if there's 3 candidates, whoever gets the most votes. So before we go and change the statute, we need to change the Constitution. Changing the Constitution begins in the legislature. It takes 2/3 of the legislature to change Maine's Constitution, and then it's put out to the voters to be ratified. Thank you.
I told you, she's the lady with the iron hand up there. Scott.
So I'm a huge fan of ranked choice voting. I looked into it some years ago, and was told that really nobody in the state of Maine was working on it, and then it really gained a head of steam. And as Jim said, it's been an issue for both sides. We've had, in the last 10 elections, an independent governor elected by plurality, a Republican governor elected by plurality, and a Democratic governor elected by plurality. It cuts across all political boundaries. And what ranked choice voting will essentially do is make sure that the will of the majority of the people of Maine is heard. Not that you will have a governor who is able to cobble together one group of people that are staunch and will stand with them, but that you have actually had to broaden your appeal across the majority of Mainers. If there are any issues with constitutionality, that is what it is. It's a law thing. But let's give the legislature something they have to work on. You pass this, they have to work on it. You don't pass it, and we have the exact same situation that we've had for the past 10 elections.
Yes, I support ranked choice voting. I support the ballot initiative. If there's a constitutional problem with it, then I think we can resolve it in the legislature. You know, that's the legislature's job, and this will give the momentum, they'll force the hand to have to resolve it. Hopefully, it would be resolved then. So I think that it's been spoken about well about how it does clarify elections, and I think that's a good thing. I think it will strengthen our democracy.
Mike, we can start with you this time. How will you help small businesses?
How would I help small business?
Yes, how will you help small businesses?
The reality is that we ought to do all we can as a state government to encourage small businesses. And one of the ways that we encourage small businesses is by minimizing their exposure to tax burden. That's why the question on question number 3, no, 1, 2, whichever, raising the income tax. Why that's an important issue.
We can't hear you, sir.
Well, again, I'm doing the best I can there. So that's why that's such an important issue. Because the reality is, anytime we increase the cost of doing business in the state, it makes it that much harder for people to create jobs and raise a family. So keeping tax burden low is important. Keeping regulations, burdensome regulations at bay is important. Doing everything we can to make sure we have an educated workforce available to create these jobs is important. Thank you.
Scott.
So I think we've all seen examples, I think, probably of a small business that had a regulatory difficulty. In Unity, I remember there was a guy who, I think he was formerly Amish, and he opened a charcuterie, which is, I did not know what a charcuterie was when he opened it, but it's like a butcher shop, I guess, basically. It's a meat store. And the state came through to basically close him down because he did not meet the regulatory standard for people who were selling food. And what he was doing was, beyond organic. He put an enormous amount of care into what he was doing, but a hard and fast regulatory system caused him problems. And this is one of those times that I absolutely love, because I actually get to say that I agreed with the governor. The governor of this state actually stepped in and said, no, we need to change this. We need to work with this. I don't get to agree with the governor that often. So it was nice to have a time when I could do that. By taking care of small businesses and focusing on them, we stop when the sign comes up. Thank you.
Well, I was a small business owner for, like, say, 30 years. This is kind of the world I've lived in. I've started a bunch of different ones, but mostly I've done construction. And so the impact of MEMIC and, workers' comp is something I deal with. And sometimes those regulations, I think, are not good, the way they're executed. Do I believe in workers' comp? Definitely. Do I want that there if any of my employees get hurt? For sure. But I think there are always these times where you need to continue to look at how does it affect the success of small businesses. I think so there's like small farmers unable to pool resources and making a slaughterhouse. Like that's kind of a simple regulatory solution that needs to happen, to make agriculture, small and medium-sized agriculture, take off more. So I think there's all of that. There's also, I think, reducing the tax burden. I think property taxes are, again, a big burden on small business, as well as, again, electrical rates. The solar would have been actually good for all small business, and it would have given them control over their own. I gotta stop.
Everything they said. we need to deregulate. We need to make a business climate that's friendly. Right now in Searsport, I have over $1 million worth of business being built from stick up, right on Main Street. That's good because we took advantage. We made our town look like something that they wanted to be at. We lowered our taxes. We worked on our regulations locally. On the state level, energy is killing us. We've got to find a way to reduce energy costs. The other thing I want to bring up, no one mentioned, so I'm glad to be last, infrastructure. We need roads, we need bridges, we need highways. We need to move the commodities that we make out, and we need to bring raw materials in so we can do better. I'm on the transportation committee, if you couldn't tell. Infrastructure in the port is vitally important to our county, and it's important to WInterport too. The rail system, we've invested a lot of money in the rail. The rail went bankrupt. It's much better today. We need to do all we can to support rail and infrastructure.
Mike, we're back to you, Scott. What is your opinion about raising the minimum wage, and if you believe it should be raised, to what amount?
Well, I'm a big supporter of question 4. Question 4 is the question about raising the minimum wage. It would take it to $9 next year, and then it would go up $1 a year thereafter until it reaches $12 an hour. And then it would be indexed to the cost of living. We would not have a fight again about raising the minimum wage because when the cost of living index came out, it would go up by that amount on an annual basis. So the cost of living, that is to say the minimum wage would keep up with the cost of living. There was a big push for $15 an hour as a minimum wage. In the state of Maine, with our widely varying economies from Fort Kent to Kittery, that's an unattainable, unreasonable number. But $12 in 2020, not $12 next year, but $12 in 2020 is a good number. It will put money in the pockets of the people who actually are going to need to spend that money. It will affect the welfare rolls in a very positive way. It's a good idea, and it's a great time for us to do it.
Yeah, I also like this referendum question. As a small business owner, I have a lot of employees, and I think that raising the minimum wage, none of them are at minimum wage, but I'll probably need to raise some of their wages as well. I'm happy to do that. I think that small business has been shown to actually grow. Sometimes seems counterintuitive, but when there's more money in the pockets of the people who are actually spending it locally, businesses tend to be able to absorb the extra incremental increases in minimum wage. It'll also help the state's revenue when people are earning money instead of needing government assistance. This is, I think, a key component of a thriving economy, and I support it strongly. And I think that the way it's structured, as Scott described it again, is a very good way to go about doing it. Too far, too fast wouldn't be good. This does not do that. So.
Okay. All right.
I actually don't support the referendum. I do support an increase to the minimum wage. I think the referendum is flawed because you don't want to set anything on autopilot. We had a very aggressive autopilot system on our gas tax. Even when the consumer price index didn't raise, the gas tax still went up. Anything you put on autopilot, you lose control of. I have no problem sitting in my seat in Augusta and pushing my button to say, let's raise this. In fact, I did vote for an increase to the minimum wage. What we have now is a referendum that's got a lot of flaws. One is the restaurant waitress wage, and that's going to have a huge impact. I've talked to waitresses who are just they're going to leave. They make more money than I do, and they were right. There's a big difference between Southern Maine and Northern Maine. I employ in Searsport. We employ 102 people. Many of them are below $8 an hour. There are paramedics and firefighters.
Look at that. So Jim mentioned the fact that we had a bill that would increase the minimum wage in the state senate. The reality is it passed. We said, look, we recognize that the current minimum wage here in the state is not adequate. But there is it was a negotiated number. It was a number that both the business industry as well as many of the people that would be receiving this could agree on. That was $10 an hour. We were ready to do that. The sad reality is that bill was killed. It was not, I repeat, not a competing measure to what you're going to vote on in the ballot. This was something that was done separate and could have been implemented, and quite frankly, people could have already seen an increase in their paycheck. But because of maybe politics, I don't know, that didn't happen. We should have been able to pass that bill.
We're all doing quite well. Jonathan, this one, we start with you. Do you think the war on drugs is succeeding? And if not, what do we need to do about it?
No. No, it is not succeeding. It's pretty clear. I think that there's a number of things we need to do. One of which is, as much as I dislike subsidizing insurance companies, which is what I believe the Affordable Care Act did, I think universal health care would have been better. I think that because we do live in a land with the Affordable Care Act now in place, we need to actually take the money that was there. There's money that was in it that we're leaving on the table, which actually would fund treatment centers in the state of Maine. Do not fund as aggressively as possible treatment centers, I think is incorrect. To focus on incarceration, I do not think that works as well. I think that it always has to be a component. As an employer, I hired people who are out of rehab and try to give them good jobs to give them a path forward. We need to do more of that so we do not have, there's a lot, this could go on for a long time, I'm out of time, but yes.
Okay, this is a little bit passionate for me because I've been 30 years as a police officer. I'm currently the town manager, but I keep my police background, I keep my training up. And I can tell you from the front line, no, we're not winning the war on drugs. 20 years ago, heroin, non-existent, really. I had a case where right locally, where I had a cup full of heroin. Nobody could tell me what it was. The drug people, the detectives down in Waldo, didn't know what it was. We had to send it to the lab. Now every officer on the street knows what heroin is. My son just recently got done. He was an Islesboro police officer. Every person he encountered practically had a spoon, a needle, or a bag of heroin. We're losing, and we're not going to arrest our way out of it. No way, I can tell you that. I was a drug enforcement DARE officer for 11 years. We need to educate, we need to enforce, and we need to rehabilitate.
So let me say, this is not a partisan issue. This is a human issue. Each and every one of us knows somebody that has been affected by this scourge. I'm very proud of the fact that in January of last year, I was the sponsor of a bill that put not only 10 more DEA agents on the streets to try and cut the flow of heroin into our state, but also provided 10 more detox beds in the Bangor region. Detox beds that are badly needed. We didn't have any. So we put significantly more resources into fighting this drug thing. But the reality is, we're losing the battle because until people realize the seriousness of the nature of this drug epidemic and make a conscious decision themselves not to involve themselves in it, we're going to continue to lose people. Very sad.
Before we move on that topic, I also am beginning of summer, we have had four heroin overdoses. That's a lot for us. So it's here. And I think the officers and the deputies in the back will agree. It is here. So, moving right along. Huh? Oh, I'm sorry, Scott.
I was happy to give you the floor for a second, Phil, but I'll thank you.
I had your name in the other corner there.
That's all right. So, yeah, the war on drugs is something that's been fought for a long time. It has not been effective. But it really needs to be approached in a very comprehensive way. We need to look at, and particularly with the heroin issue, how are prescription opiates being sent out? How are those being prescribed? What opportunities do people have other than drugs? You know, if you have an economy where you have no hope as a young person, that's what turns a lot of people to drugs in the first place. If we're not giving the young people that are coming up in Maine hope for their future here in this state, but we're giving them easy access to prescription opiates, we know what's going to happen. We can see it. I mean, Phil, we just heard about it from Phil right here in town. So if we don't approach this in a holistic way with treatment and law enforcement, but also with a good economy, we will never get this problem right. And now I'm done.
Jonathan.
Nope.
Close.
James. What is your opinion of the most recently revised large-scale mining regulations that would allow mines to pollute the groundwater within the mining area?
This is a difficult one because I voted against it, I was lobbied, I voted for it. I'm still against it. I freely tell you I made a mistake in my final vote, but when it was first introduced in the 125th legislature, adamantly voted against it. We tried to do mining in our general region, in this area. We're still paying for the Callahan mine. The state DOT puts millions of dollars into the budget every year to do mitigation for the Callahan mine. It's a Superfund site, a stone's throw away from us. It never produced anything for the state of Maine. Before that, we mined Blue Hill. We made a big slag pile on Blue Hill. The president came up, Roosevelt came up and said, this is going to be great. We're going to put people to work. It never really produced anything. It never really produced the jobs that were promised. So before we can move forward with mining for an out-of-country interest, we better look at making it clean so we don't destroy water.
So I think Jim did a great job of explaining it. The reality is, if we can do it and we can create significant jobs without making pollution, we ought to be doing it. We ought to tap Maine's natural resources. We've got to make sure we do it in an environmentally friendly way. We didn't get there because, quite frankly, there was disagreement as to whether or not we could do it in an environmentally friendly way, and the rules were never written and accepted by the legislature. We need to make sure that if we can do it, while not hurting Maine's environment, then we ought to do it. If we can't do it in an environmentally friendly way, then we shouldn't do it. That'll be a great debate, and we'll make sure we take care of Maine's environment. Thank you.
Phil, could you read the question one more time for me?
What is your opinion of the most recently revised large-scale mining regulations that would allow mines to pollute the groundwater within the mining area?
I'm going to say right up front, I don't know a great deal about our mining regulations. Certainly, allowing it to pollute groundwater, those aren't words I really want to have go together. There are a number of things when you become a legislator that you are going to know about, because it's going to be in your background. There are going to be plenty of things you're not going to know about. This is one of those things, I don't know enough to give you an opinion about this. I would welcome feedback from anybody who's an expert on this kind of thing in town. I will seek out experts when I'm making my decisions on something like this. I will not vote based on what I've read in a newspaper. I will not vote based on what I heard down at the Bacon Tree. I will be looking for experts whenever I come upon something that I don't know about. And I'm going to take the 10 seconds, hasn't even gone up. So I'm going to take a quick moment just to say how much I enjoyed hearing Jim say that he was going to admit he had made a mistake. That's not an easy thing to do when you have cast a vote and then you come before a group of people and say, I shouldn't have done what I did.
So, particularly to the question of polluting the groundwater, where there's mining, that is not a good idea. If this is referring to, actually, which I think it might be referring to, is like the bill that was before the legislature 2 times in a row, which was essentially to open up these high sulfide mining in northern Maine. That is a clear example in my mind of subsidizing a large international corporation to make money off the backs of Maine's environment and our working and our long-term health of our fiscal health, as well. As Jim pointed out, we have spent a lot of money and will be until the next series of glaciers comes and scrapes it clean, the Callahan mine. And that is not a burden which we want to continue to increase to the taxpayers and the citizens of Maine. So anything that destroys our environment and our ability to continue to have a viable economy is not a good idea.
Like to start with you. How will you work to improve broadband service throughout the state?
Wow. Well, I know that we have a broadband fund that does build out high-speed internet, and it's so crucial to our economy. Making sure that our main small businesses, our schools, our libraries, people that live in our state have access to the absolute best high-speed internet is key to the growing Maine's economy. Obviously, it takes money if you're talking about the government building it out rather than, at a fast pace. And so there's always competition for resources. I know that we have a DAC fiber 3-ring binder that runs right through here. We're very fortunate for that. Anything we can do to continue to build out high-speed internet is going to be good for Maine's economy.
Yeah, the infrastructure's been talked about a little bit, and we usually think about infrastructure in terms of rail, ports, roads, but the IT infrastructure is incredibly important, and it is something that the state has to take an active hand in. But this is an area where I think the state can incentivize competition amongst different modes. We have right in town, I always see a truck actually right down on Main Street, Premium Broadband. This is a company that does broadband in a different way than the traditional, DSL or cable. There's Red Zone is a company around that does a radio broadband, wireless. I know in the town of Herman, they offer that. There are a number of different ways you can expand broadband, and it does not have to be anybody saying everything's going to be fiber or everything's going to be cable. It doesn't have to be that. We can incentivize the competition, and we can let the private sector in the market really figure this out. Thank you.
So I have to agree that this is obviously an issue that's important for small business and developing rural communities' economy, whether it be farmers trying to sell their goods in rural Waldo County or wherever. The limited access to broadband is a problem for developing small business. And I can't say right now that I know enough to say this is how we need to do it. Having towns try to take the burden up is not succeeding. Even some of the wealthiest towns in Maine, like Bar Harbor, have not been able to pass ordinances or pass the funding necessary to even bring it into Bar Harbor. I believe Islesboro is going to do that. This needs to be taken on a state level and made available to all the rural communities.
There is no silver bullet, okay? There's no, what would work in southern Maine is not going to work in northern Maine. We have too much distance, there's too much cable or fiber optic to lay. We need to put some money into the research. I supported a bill by Representative Higgins who started to try to fund some of the research, and I'll continue to support alternative ways. Like Scott mentioned, there's different ways to bring broadband to people, and we've just got to look at all of those and make a decision on all of them. They all need to work, and we need to throw some money at it, there's no doubt.
Do you support question 1?
Question one is that medical marijuana? Okay, thank you.
We're on the social issues now, I guess.
I figured
It's
we were
not
probably getting through all of the referendum questions.
It's not medical marijuana.
Which one is
It's not medical, it's just legalized.
Oh, I see, that's another correct. Thank you. Yeah, right, this is recreation, that's right. Medical marijuana is already legal. I do support question one. That was a really hard, actually, decision for me to make because I've never really, in my life, taken something that was illegal my whole life and then said, yeah, we should just change and we should make that legal. I smoked cigarettes for almost the majority of my life. I quit 6 months before my wife and I decided to start having kids. We both quit. I drink alcohol. I do that in moderation, and I am in control of when and where I do it. Marijuana is something that people, let's face it, have used recreationally in the state of Maine for a very long time. This is a product that is currently, in some other states, legal for recreational use, taxed, and they're doing it successfully. Absolutely nothing is perfect, but unless we are interested in more failed prohibition, this is a good avenue to try a new way to deal with an ongoing social problem.
This is also a tough one. I will support this referendum question. I have mixed feelings about it. I don't smoke marijuana. I did when I was young. And I decided very early it wasn't helpful. It didn't make my life go better, and I didn't see it making other people's lives going better. But I think having it illegal, I think, has also failed. And there is problems with this particular legislation, which I'm not happy with. But in the general principle of actually legalizing it and trying to regulate it and actually reduce the use of it, I think that, like alcohol, prohibition has not worked, and the burden to society of having people in jail for minor amounts of recreational marijuana has not been good. So, and having him try to employ people coming out of rehab and stuff like that for more serious drugs, but out of prison culture is not one which leads to better citizens. So.
I can't support question one, and I'm with Jonathan. It's flawed. 2 summers ago, I spent some time down at Harvard. I was with the chief medical officer for the state of Colorado, and he said what had happened there was they moved the recreational marijuana in, and they completely hurt the medical marijuana program that was going. We have a successful medical marijuana program. It works. People are getting help by it. And if we move in recreational without doing the hard work of finding out how those laws will mix with each other, we're doing a disservice to medical marijuana. And I can't support referendum 1 because of that.
So, maybe the question is it a gateway drug? Do people start with marijuana and progress to other things? I think each and every one of us has to decide that. If the answer to that is yes, then certainly you shouldn't support this. If you can honestly say that you don't know anybody that ever started smoking pot and ended up taking harder drugs, then probably that's a poor decision. Personally, I think it is a gateway drug. I don't see how that fixes what is already a huge drug problem in our culture. I don't know how that normalizing that and having people doing that on Main Street in Winterport is going to make our town or our state a better place to live.
I have to ask you all, we've been 1 hour now. Do I keep going? Okay, good. Then, the next question, Jonathan. How do you feel about immigration into Maine specifically? Maine.
Immigration, like from outside of Maine, meaning from the United States, or from
Into Maine.
Okay.
Into Maine.
So I'm assuming this is a question about people who do not currently live in the United States moving to Maine. So, and I think that, well, a number of years ago, I helped a friend sail a small boat down the East Coast, and we came to the Statue of Liberty, and we moored right in front of it. And that is one of the symbols of our country, which I actually have a great deal of pride in. Our willingness and openness to actually allow and encourage people who are facing hardship and persecution in their lives elsewhere to actually make a new home in this country and in Maine, I think is one of the best things that we as a country have always stood for. How we do it in a way which is, obviously safe for everybody, and that's a lot of people are scared about that, is important, but I think what I understand of the current regulations in place now, they seem to be working pretty well. But I do support
I'm not sure that this is exactly a state legislature issue. This is a federal issue, but I will chime in. Immigration is fine. Many of us were immigrants. Our grandparents, our great-grandparents were immigrants. We wouldn't be a country without it. We do need to be careful. We do need to have a good vetting process that's going to protect us. The 9/11 terrorists drove right down the state. We didn't have a good vetting process for the people coming into our state and traveling to do our terror. We need to have a foolproof, bulletproof, at least as much as we can, process to make sure that the people coming in are going to be good for us. They have to support our communities and our country, and that's how I support it.
So the first thing I want to say is nobody goes to jail for having just a little bit of recreational marijuana. We have filling our jails up for that. Look, immigration. The reality is we need a workforce, okay? And the only way, because a lot of our families are having 1, 2, maybe 3 children. Somebody has 3 children, they've got a big family. So we need a workforce. And my doctor, he's an Indian man. He's a good doctor. I'm glad he's here. I think each and every one of us are in contact with people that have made a conscious decision to live in our state. Just like the French Catholics, my family was French Catholic. They came here, and guess what? Everybody was afraid that the French Catholics were going to change the culture of our state. The reality is, maybe they did, but maybe we're okay with it today.
So I love the idea of immigration in the state of Maine. I said in my introduction that we have fewer jobs today than we had in 2007, which is true. We also, though, have a low unemployment rate. Those two things sort of seem incongruous, but we have one of the oldest populations in the entire country. And so we have so many retirees that there aren't enough people out there looking for jobs to make it matter so much that we don't have as many jobs. We don't have a workforce to offer to a company that wants to come here. We don't have enough people. When you look at the city of Lewiston, when the Somali immigration came into Lewiston, there was a crazy backlash when that happened. There were a lot of people who were very upset about it. Lewiston is now one of the fastest, if not the fastest, growing city in the state of Maine. Their culture has been revived by this vibrant influx of people who are opening businesses, employing Mainers, lifetime Mainers, people who've been here for generations. Immigration is something not only that is good, it's something we absolutely need.
James, what is your opinion of the governor's plan to privatize Aspire?
I don't think the legislature is going to have very much to say about that. It's a governor's prerogative. It's an executive decision. I don't think that I agree with it. It is going to put some people out of work, but it is an executive decision, not a legislative decision. So, it's just not something we're going to have any say over.
So the bottom line is, very much like Jim said, we don't have a lot to say over it. If he's doing it for the right reason, if he's doing it to make Maine more efficient, to deliver the services that people desperately need in the most cost-effective manner, then that's a good thing. It ultimately is his decision, not a decision of the legislature. We're not in to take that up. Don't know a lot about it, quite frankly, other than what I read in the Bangor Daily News. So all you know as much about it as I do. The reality is, the decisions that we make need to be based upon our desire to deliver the services that people desperately need in the most cost-effective manner.
So I'm not a fan of the decision to take the Aspire funding away. Aspire is a program that helps people, I think it's primarily people around the Temporary Assistance to Needy Families program, get them to work, get them to a place where they can get back on their own feet. This is a program that should be maintained here in Maine, and it should be taken care of by Mainers. There's no reason to outsource this to a New York company. Representative Drew Gattine, who's a name that unfortunately we all learned from what I call 34 seconds of shame, had a bill in last legislature to stop this exact thing from happening, because this was discussed by the administration. The bill didn't go through. Now, the legislature does not want to have to micromanage the administrative. That's not really the role of the legislature. They set policy, the administrative executes that policy. But when the executive branch is doing this kind of stuff, the legislature can step in and should step in. And unfortunately, it didn't.
So I also think that this does not sound to me, from what I've read about it and heard about it, as a good idea. I think privatizing parts of the state government when it's not shown that actually there's anything wrong with waste being administered and especially sending it out to an out-of-state corporation to do it, I think is not moving in the right direction. That I haven't seen any compelling evidence that I've seen in any things I've read that indicate that this is a good idea. I may learn some, I haven't yet. So.
If elected, what would you do to improve civility in state politics?
Good Lord, can I have more than 1 minute? Look, I don't think anybody here thinks that we're doing a really great job with that, okay? But I'd like to think that I've been part of the solution, not part of the problem at the State House when it comes to civility. I've tried very hard to work both with Republicans and Democrats to find the solution to Maine's problems. I don't have all the answers. Quite frankly, sometimes when I think I've got the right answer, I'm convinced that I'm wrong. Nothing wrong with that. Working together, we can find solutions. If we just stop talking to each other, we just divide out as a nation. We've seen too much of that in Washington, D.C. We know that they can't fix things in Washington, D.C. because they don't talk to each other. We don't want Augusta, Maine to be that way. We want to work together to find solutions that our state desperately needs.
So we've seen a real degradation in civility over the past 5 years. We've largely become numb to things that would have been catastrophic in terms of incivil language and tone 6 years ago. I've been both paid staff and volunteer staff on Republican campaigns and Democratic campaigns. The reason I've been comfortable doing both of those things when my values are certainly those of the Democratic Party is because there are people who come along that have the right idea. They have the right set of skills for the time. They have the right temperament. And when that comes along, you support it. Same goes for an idea. It does not matter where the idea comes from. You support the good idea. The idea that's going to help the people of the state of Maine have a better life, have a better income, a better retirement, a better life for their kids. And if you're focused on that, the civil tone will follow.
So in small business, how you treat people is how you stay in business. If you're disrespectful to your employees, to your customers, to your subcontractors, to your suppliers, you're out of business. At least that's been my experience. This is not how some people in state government have obviously been conducting themselves. I think that it is unfortunate that there's been absolutely no consequences for any of the recent things that have happened, which I think have pulled down even farther the level of discourse which is accepted as even if not admired, but is tolerated to continue to exist. But I think also that basically we are all models, and to everyone around us. And if you're in a public position, then you are actually a role model for a much larger audience, a larger group of people, and you need to conduct yourself in that way. So.
I'm going to talk as quickly as I can because I want to get a lot into this. When I ran 6 years ago, I ran against an incumbent. The first mailer that went out was paid for by the Republican Party, and it was negative. I called them up and I said, hey, don't do that. I don't act that way. Don't send those mailers out. It's negative. I don't think I've had a mailer sent out positive or negative since then from the Republican Party. I ran the next session, a very clean session. My opponent's in the room today. I think she'd agree. It was very clean and very civil. The next session, I ran against Joe Brooks from WInterport here. And he thanked me at the end of the session. Thanks for not being negative. I don't believe in it. I don't act that way. Scott asked me when he decided to run, he saw me in the halls of the House, and I said, I run a clean campaign. I'm not going to be negative. You never know where you're going to be. I have another selectman, two selectmen, one former and one current, and they'll tell you they've never heard an uncivil tone from me, I believe. I hope they'll say that. About that.
Okay, Scott, do you feel we need more gun control laws?
I'm going to take this as asking about question 3, because by and large here in the state of Maine, I don't feel like we need more gun control laws. However, I am in favor of question 3. And question 3 is one of the referendum that is designed to basically close loopholes around background checks. Background checks are something that we've had in place for a long time. They have proven effective. They are a minor inconvenience, but they have proven effective in keeping guns out of the hands of people that we really need to keep guns away from. There is a part of question 3 that I really don't like, but I'm not going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You can't, in question 3, if you're going moose hunting and you don't have a gun of an appropriate caliber to go moose hunting, you can't borrow one without getting a background check. I want to change that. But by and large, I think question 3 is a good referendum that should go through.
So, do we need more gun regulations? That's the question. So, I think that increasing the requirement on background checks is a good idea. I have a lot of guns. I've given a lot of guns away. I've sold a lot of guns, and I've bought a lot of guns without background checks through Uncle Henry's. And I've bought guns from gun dealers that had background checks. I've never seen getting a background check be a problem. And for someone to have that be a problem for them, you know, well, that might be someone who I don't want to have a gun. The statistics I've seen is that increasing background checks has actually reduced violence in domestic abuse. That to me is a pretty compelling argument. Question 3 clearly has major problems with it as far as our hunting traditions. That would be, if it does pass, it would be something that would immediately have to be rectified, as most referendum questions have had to be done. So do I want a lot more gun regulations? No, but background checks I'm okay with.
Yeah, we related to question 3. I don't think that's a good question. I don't agree with it. I was a police chief for a long time. Searsport, I issued concealed weapons permits. I did background checks. I found people that shouldn't have guns. I found people that should have guns. I had an example where somebody actually had an accident and he became not able to have a gun. He was not mentally there to have a gun. He still carried a gun. He got arrested in Connecticut. He still had a little piece of paper in his wallet that had my signature on it. It was a photocopy. And I got a phone call saying, should this guy have this gun? And I said, absolutely not. Not concealed. Not that he couldn't have it, but he couldn't have it concealed. I think there's a flaw with question 3. It's unenforceable, and I think it's unfortunately become a waste of our time to go and vote on.
Unenforceable, and maybe a false sense of security. The reality is, the only people that care about that are law-abiding citizens. The people that should have access to guns. If you're talking about criminals, people that have criminal backgrounds, they don't care whether or not they're breaking the law in possessing a gun. If they're really a criminal element, this isn't going to prevent them from doing whatever they want to do. If they're going to commit a gun crime, they're not going to. The idea that you have to have a background check is not going to stop them from having it. And the reality is, and everyone in this room knows it, if you want to talk about out-of-state money coming in and trying to influence the way we live, this is a prime example of it. Mayor Bloomberg is putting millions of dollars into this state to try to change our culture.
I'll get better. Jonathan, this one's for you. Listen carefully, I might have to reread this again. Because this is not just for you, but it's starting with you. Municipalities are seeing property tax revenues being squeezed as a result of the Maine legislature and nonprofit businesses and land trusts taking taxable properties off the books, resulting in fewer people carrying the burden. I would like to hear your views on this and how you would address this problem if elected. Did everybody understand that, or do I need to read it?
The question is, basically, yeah, I think so.
Property taxes are being squeezed.
Yeah, because of nonprofits taking land, taxable land out of revenue for towns. So I think that if a business or, if there's an organization which is set up as a nonprofit legitimately that is taking revenue out, that is something which as a state, we have to make a determination of what actually qualifies, to be exempt, to be nonprofit, to be exempt from local property taxes. If we have a good process there which actually is filtering out things which aren't actually deserving of that, then I think that is something that, yes, as towns, we end up having to pick up the tab. I think that nonprofits that are taking, land trusts, some land trusts, and most of the ones I'm familiar with, that are not paying taxes, if they're not paying taxes, are providing another benefit to society. And if we've determined that that is the value which we all need and benefit from, then the loss of revenue may be an acceptable exchange. I think it has to be looked at closely, but,
Yeah, the legislature and the executive have worked on this quite a bit. In fact, there was a piece of legislation looking to change the way tax structure is for nonprofits. I could support that. I could support getting rid of revenue sharing as well. One of the things that I wanted to put on for an amendment is if the state owns a sizable amount of property in your municipality, they should be paying for that too. We're all in this together. We all have to find a way. We have something called a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes. Some nonprofits do it, others don't. And when Jonathan talks about the value, if they're bringing enough value to the town, maybe that could be measured. But that is such a difficult burden to figure out. And I can speak for Searsport. We lost a big island down there to the state. They've owned it ever since. And we lost $250,000 in tax revenue that year. And we've never recovered it. So there's a balance. We're going to have to find it. I'd love to be working on that problem in Augusta.
So maybe the answer is everything in moderation. It's fine if you live in a community where this doesn't happen often. There aren't large tracts of land. But in some communities, this is really starting to shift that tax burden. Significant amounts of revenue is being lost. Another example of this shift is the tree growth program. Another example is the tree growth is a huge one along Maine's coast. We have people that have really valuable real estate, and they put that into tree growth. They build a home on a small portion of it, and then they really don't have any intention of harvesting. But they ask their neighbors to pick up the extra property tax because their valuation is locked in at a lower rate because it's in tree growth. It is a real issue. It's something that should be addressed.
So there are a number of factors. We've talked about property taxes a lot tonight, which is fantastic because property tax is one of, if not the most regressive taxes that we've got. And there are a number of factors that cause these squeezes. And when you have taxable properties going off the tax rolls, that's one thing. But if you aren't already squeezed, a change like this is something that a town could possibly absorb, so long as it's not obviously a majority of the taxable properties coming off the rolls. But if you had the proper amount of revenue sharing that we've always had, if you had state aid to schools meeting that 55%, a squeeze like this becomes a bump in the road that a municipality has tools to deal with. Whereas if you are already suffering from a cut in revenue sharing, like towns are, and you're already suffering as a school district from cuts to state aid education, something like this becomes a huge problem. So if we fix those two, it will give us the stop sign.
James, start with you. What do you think are the top 3 issues facing prospective constituents? Top 3 issues.
Well, we talked a lot about one of them, taxes. That's first and foremost, finding a way to get property taxes lowered. And we had mechanisms in Augusta that we put into place to help that. Our homestead exemption. If you're a Maine resident and you're living in your home, your homestead exemption this year went up. And in fact, we had a small increase, mostly due to a bump in education. But many of our people who live in Searsport actually had a decrease of the tax bills. So that was a huge help for us. Cost of energy, obviously we talked about this briefly. It's terrible for business. It's also terrible for us. We need to find ways to reduce our energy. One way we should be looking at that is offshore wind. It's on the cusp of being brought to us. We need to be looking at that and finding ways to support that. And I guess the third is infrastructure. We need safe roads, we need safe bridges. We have a huge gap between the revenue coming in and what we need to fix our bridges and roads.
I get confused sometimes with where we're going, okay?
It's gonna go 2 more questions.
Look, I think everybody knows that the number one issue for our state is jobs and economy. How do we create jobs? How do we make our economy grow? I think that if you're not talking about that, then you're missing the opportunity, okay? The other thing that we want to make sure is that we're taking care of Maine's elderly. We've put significantly more money into doing that in this last budget, something I'm very proud of. You know, our nursing homes, we lost the one in Pittsfield. We've lost the ones in down East Maine because our reimbursement rates were so very low. We asked, there was no private pay or no amount of private pay people in many of the rural Maine nursing homes. And because they depended solely on state reimbursement rates, they closed them. You know, if you're an elderly person and you live in Washington County, you ought to be able to age in place at home. You shouldn't have to move to Bangor when your family lives in Lubec. So things like that are important as well.
So the 3 issues that I think are sort of most important to most folks, most constituents, are going to be taxation, education, and jobs. We talk about it as the economy, but really the way the economy filters down to most of us is the job we get. Can you make enough money at what you do for a living to provide for your family? Taxes certainly figures into that. We need a fair tax system. Currently, under our current tax system, with the way we have our sales, property, and income taxes settled up, if you're in the middle 20% of earners, you're paying just under 10% of your overall income to the state tax regime, to those 3 taxes. If you're in the top 20%, you're below 8%. A progressive tax scheme, the way we've done income taxes and taxation throughout my life anyway, you start low. If you make very little, you pay very high. As your income goes up, so does the amount that you pay overall. And that's a fair tax system. But we don't have it right. That's all.
So I think that the issue of, one of the top issues, obviously jobs, but it actually needs to be good paying jobs. We have a lower, we've had a success in lowering our employment rate, but it has not been an increase of good paying jobs. Working, 40 hours or more and not being able to actually make ends meet, that's not a good job. So we need job growth, but it has to be good job growth, good paying jobs. We need to have, we need to make sure that when we're reducing taxes, when we talk about taxes, it's making a fair taxation, and we get good value from the taxes that we pay in. So that issue is also right up there. I'd say that 3. There's hard to choose 3. I'd actually chime in on that the needs for our elderly, for actually being able to actually have their needs, was that a stop or is that a 10?
10.
That was 10, okay. I'm caring for my mother right now, and no, I'm gonna stop.
The last question, Mike, it starts with you.
Nice.
Is
No.
DH,
No, Scott?
is it Scott?
James.
No, it's Mike.
It's Mike.
How about it be me? Can I go first?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Is DHSS being dismantled?
Wow. No, I don't think so. I mean, it's the biggest portion of the state's budget. Are they making some decisions that are controversial? Absolutely, yes. Are they all the right ones? I guess probably not anybody makes all the right decisions, but they're making significant changes. You know, I was proud to work with the speaker during the last legislative session to sponsor some welfare reform. I think that everybody in this room recognizes that that needed to happen. And we talked about it for a decade. And the reality is, the Speaker Eves and I worked over a series of months on some significant welfare reform. I was proud to be part of that. I was proud to make something happen that has only been talked about for nearly a decade. So by working together, we can find solutions to Maine's problems.
Yeah, I think there's a way that you can look at it to say that DHHS is being dismantled. A lot of the programs that have been historically in place, there are programs that have been historically in place that are going away. Recently, we turned down funding, or we stopped funding, that was from the federal government that dealt with youth mental illness and mental health. We just stopped taking the money. This is a program that we were providing help to these kids, and we just stopped doing it. We're outsourcing programs. We're outsourcing things that we have always taken care of, the Aspire program, things like that. We're privatizing them. We're getting away from those being a function of the state, and we are trying to make them a function of the private sector. We're trying to make it a profit motive instead of caring for the people of the state of Maine. So it's still going to be there, but I think there is a dismantling process underway right now with DHHS.
Well, it sure looks like it's being dismantled when you start sending jobs to, the Aspire program, when you don't fully fund, when there's battles over actually what to do with Riverview that seem to not really be leading to good outcomes and not having adequate staff. There's a lot of programs that the DHHS is involved with that are critical, that are, I think, being gutted in ways which don't lead to a better Maine for all of us. There's that under the name of stamping out abuse, a lot of good programs actually help our neighbors and help us sometimes are being harmed, and that being fiscally responsible with our tax dollars is really important. It's critical, but again, it's that whole thing of we pay our money, we pay our tax dollars, and we want to get good value for it. And actually, I think some of the programs going now with DHS, some of the ways it's being modified are actually going to lower our value that we get.
I don't believe it's being dismantled. We were just recognized nationally for our response to the opiate epidemic. It was a national recognition of our DHHS department. They got national recognition. So I think they're doing some things in the right way. I can tell you from my committee, transportation, we have jobs that are unfilled. There's a rate of jobs which the state says you're not going to fill 7%. We have some of those jobs in DOT that have sat on the books for 15 years. If you're on the books for 15 years and you haven't been filled, cut the job, reset the rate. If you couldn't tell, I'm a Republican by nature, and I believe in a smaller government, and I think what's happening at DHHS needed to happen many years ago. We're right-sizing, we're right-sizing the government. And I support some of what they're doing. Maybe not all, but I think this state needs to look at what we're spending.
I think this has been a pretty productive session, so we're going to close up now. We're going to start with summations. Each candidate has 2 minutes. Please keep your eyes open. 8 more minutes, maybe 9. Okay? Scott, 2 minutes.
Well, thank you guys very much. I've been very impressed with the crowd, and no calling out, everything been very respectful. This is the first time I've done anything like this. So I'm going to get a picture, y'all. I hope you guys are okay, because I'm going to need something to remember this by. Thank you all for smiling. Very nice. So I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to serve the people of the state of Maine, the people of Winterport, Frankfort, Swanville, and Searsport. I hope that I have the opportunity to serve you. The education, the taxation, the job creation that needs to happen, the way that we need to innovate and change, is something that can only be done when you have new people bringing different ideas in. And I have worked amongst a lot of you. I have spent the time volunteering in this community to get to know people. And I've spent the time on the RSU 22 school board, seeing how the education decisions made at the state level come down and really affect us here. And there are changes that need to be made. I hope to be part of a new group of people coming in that are going to try to help the state move forward, try to help us get back the national reputation that we had as just a wonderful place to be, a wonderful place to come, a place that is successful. And with your help, I can do that. None of us up here can do anything without the support of the people. That's where any power that any politician gets to vote on anything comes from, is from folks like yourself. So thank you very much. Thank you to the Winterport Union Meeting House Board for holding this again. Phil, thank you very much for doing what you do. And thank you very much to the timekeepers for being gentle with us. We appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Yes, I also want to thank everyone for coming out. And excellent questions. Those were a lot of fun. Kept me thinking. And I'd have to say that this process of this season and of the last season of meeting voters and citizens all around the Waldo County has been something that has really enriched me, and it's I have enjoyed hearing the concerns and and seeing people's lives. And the thing I take away from that is we have a lot of challenges facing us. We have an amazingly we have a huge wealth disparity in Waldo County and in this state. That makes many lives very hard. I want to work to try to change that. I see people with, struggling with inadequate work or low-paying work. These things. These are issues that really face us. I see the consequences of the mercury contamination of the Penobscot River, putting lobster and crab fishing, out of work and shifting them down into the bay and making them, conflicts between different, fishing community, different fishing, lobstermen. This is something where, these problems were caused by lack of government, involvement with Holtercam and now Mallinckrodt. These kind of things are what our government, we require our government to do. We need them to defend us from people who are bad actors, and we need to make sure that they actually provide an opportunity for all of us to have a good, thriving future. That is what I want to work for. I want to work for all of you, and I'd like to work with you. It's clearly, I think as Scott said, it's not something any one of us does alone, and I have really valued all of the information that I've already been shared with me about what people's lives really need and what is hard about them now and where people want to go in the future. So, thank you very much.
I too want to thank everyone for being here and the committee and for paying attention to this great building. I spent many nights 30 years ago walking around it, but I never got inside because it was never broken into when I was constable. I spent many nights on top of Phil's store because there were burglars in town too, right?
Yeah.
And he's even delivered me gas when I ran out of there, so in my cruiser. But I really want to thank you. I'm very passionate about law enforcement. I'm very passionate about roads and infrastructure and the future of our ports. But this past session, I became extremely passionate about education. I passed LD 1277 when people said you just couldn't do it, and that's to create the magnet school that I spoke about. I want to train students, I want to teach students or have students taught to go into the maritime industries, transportation, shipping, marine education. I think it's extremely important. I still have a deliverable that I have to do on February 15th in Augusta. And if I'm not there, I'm going to do everything to educate Scott to get there and to bring this home, because our maritime fleet is aging. The average age of the maritime sailor in the U.S. is 56. In 5 years, there'll be 75,000 U.S. jobs. And we are crazy if we don't get some of our students trained and out on those ships to make those $100,000 a year jobs. So I'm passionate about that. We've been working really hard. Passing the bill was the easy part, kind of. Doing the hard work and the lifting work to get it actually delivered has been incredibly difficult through the summer. And it's actually taken a great deal of my personal time. I thank my wife greatly for supporting. I think she left. We get up at 5 in the morning, so we're past my bedtime, but I thank her greatly. You all heard it. And you can
You know, just 2 years ago when I was elected and president of the state senate, the folks in the office did a little bit of checking. They looked back to see when was the last time that we had a senate president from Waldo County. Now, they found that 90 years ago, Senator Buzzell from Belfast served as Senate President. And I say jokingly, you know, when nobody's sure what Senator Buzzell did, but it took everybody 90 years to forget, so I'm going to be on my best behavior. The reality is, there's maybe a hint of truth to that. You know, I really have tried very hard to be on my best behavior, to make the people of Waldo County proud of the fact that I'm their state senator, that I go to the State House in Augusta every morning with one thing in mind, and that's to do the very best I can by the taxpayers, by the citizens, by the people that I represent in Waldo County, and indeed the people all across that state. And I truly believe that out of the 151 members of the Maine House and 35 members of the State Senate, that all of them people come with that very same goal. Now, has it been tough? Has it been rough? Well, if you read a newspaper, I think you'd come to the answer of yes. But I am incredibly proud of the fact that not once did I buckle to that pressure. I did what I thought was right. You may or may not agree with me, but I'll guarantee you, if you get a piece of mail that says who does Mike Thibodeau work for, you need to know the answer to that, is he works for the people of Waldo County and the people of the state of Maine. Thank you for coming, and thank you for listening.
Yourselves another round of applause. This is wonderful that you're all here.
Thank you for
this evening.
And real quick, the money thing. Come on, that's the most important thing. For everybody that got a ticket tonight, whoever.